All right. So, once again, good morning. Module 5 here in Computer Programming 11b actually talks about the concept of what we called inheritance. Now, to simply understand the meaning of inheritance, it's actually, let's try to define inheritance in, of course, using our layman's term. When we say inheritance in terms of the way how we know it, from the word inherit, in Tagalog, namana. 'Di ba? So, namana. When you use the term inheritance, especially ito, sa totoong buhay natin, you might actually think of genetic inheritance, from biology. Especially, for example, blood type, eye color, siguro, hair color. Yan. Those are an example of inherited properties or inherited genes. Siguro, yung iba sa inyo, namana yung mata ng nanay nyo, di ba? Bibig ng tatay nyo, and so on. Now, those particular inherited abilities or at least properties are what we call attributes in Java programming, or let's say data fields, diba? And similarly, you often can credit your behavior to what we call the inheritance. For example, your attitude towards saving money might be the same as your grandmother's, and the odd way that you pull on your ear when you are tired might match what your Uncle Steve does. So, ganun po, ang very basic na definition natin ng inheritance sa real world. Diba? That's the concept. We already know the definition of inheritance. Now, when we say inheritance naman in what we call the Java programming, we are actually talking about the mechanism that enables a particular class. Diba? So, for example, we have a class here. Yan. And that specific class have their attributes, diba? And those particular class or that specific class ngayon will try to inherit the behavior and attributes of another class. So, meron kang two classes, for example. Yan. Tapos, yung isa, ini-inherit mo yung data fields niya. Say, for example, yung get name, yung mga ganyan, di ba? Name, first name, last name, middle name, diba? Meaning, you can actually create a new class simply by indicating the ways in which it differs from a class that already has been developed and tested. When you create a class, by making it inherit from another class, the new class automatically contains all the data fields and methods of the original class. This will actually be the main focus of our discussion today because I will show you by the end of this module how to apparently solve and understand an inheritance concept. Okay? So, that's actually the basic concept of inheritance. Now, in Java, we have what we call the UML diagram, Unified Modeling Language. Okay? This is actually a model or a chart, let's say, yan, in which consists of many types of diagram, which can, of course, help illustrate inheritance. Meron tayong tinatawag na class diagram in which I will show you. Although, this is very easy to create. Okay? It's really important for you to know how to do it. Now, for example, we have an employee class. Okay? So, an employee class, kumbaga, isang employee, particularly, an employee has the following data fields or let's say attribute. Meron siyang ID, salary, hindi ko na nilagay dito pero meron yung name, diba? First name, last name, and so on. Pero to make things very simple, this is actually the class and this is the data fields or let's say what we called the attributes. Using the class diagram, this is actually how you write them using the, of course, class diagram. First of all, dito sa may taas na part, ilalagay mo kung ano yung class, okay, ano yung class name. And in the second part of the diagram is where you will put the variables na gagamitin mo. For example, yun nga, naisip mo ang isang employee ay may ID at may initial salary, you have to at least put here the ID and the data type. So ID corresponds to integer and salary corresponds to double. Diba? Now, after putting all the variables here, you have the following methods na kinukuha mo. So, you have get ID. Ito yung tinatawag natin na setters and getters. Diba? So, kung natatandaan yung discussion natin ng Module 2, kung hindi ako nagkakamali, or Module 3, I mean, kung hindi ako nagkakamali, this actually talks about the accessors and mutators in Java programming. So, you have an ID as one attribute, and from that specific ID, you have an accessor and mutator, which is the set ID and get ID. So for each particular methods here, so for example, the get ID, you will also put the return type, which is this case, the return type of ID is integer because you will return a value. Okay? Pagka tinawag mo si get ID, you will return a value which is an integer value. Same goes through with salary. If you try to call the get salary method, you will apparently return a double. And a double value. Now for the setters, and you will simply set the ID, and the return type is void. Meaning it doesn't have any return type. I mean, it doesn't need to return any specific values, but only set the methods. Okay, properties. So, para ito, set ID, tapos sa loob niya, meron kang ID num. Ganun din sa set salary. Double sal. Kung natatandaan niyo yung sample problem natin before, which is actually the person, nasan ba yung person natin? Yan. So, for example, you have a person class. So, from a person class, you have the following attributes. First name, last name, birth date. So, that alone is what we call the the attributes. Yung kumbaga, yung trait ng isang person. So, meron kang first name, last name, and birth date. Now, from this one, you have created the accessors and mutators. Pero in this case, para mas madali, yun, yung get first name, get last name, get birth date. So, ang i-return mo is string, and a date dito. Now, from this alone, from this particular UML diagram, kasi mas madali niyong maintindihan yung relationship ng dalawa or tatlong classes if you try to create the class diagram for them. Okay, so this is an optional knowledge for everybody. Pero I think at some point, ako kasi hindi na rin ako gumagamit nito, to be honest. Kasi gusto ko medyo memorize ko na rin kasi ang object-oriented programming. So I can just simply put any data fields directly sa code natin tapos saka ko na lang siya i-arrange. Okay, pero as a starter, pwede po natin gamitin ito para hindi tayo malito. Now, since after you create the employee class, you can actually create a specific employee objects such as the following. So, meron tayo ditong employee, which is an object, diba? This is an object, meaning this is another class na tinatawag natin. And we will name that employee as receptionist. Yan. So, new simply stands for creating a new class or instantiating a new object in Java programming using the employee class. Ayan, so employee, receptionist, employee, delivery person. Now, these employee objects eventually can possess different numbers and salaries. But because they are employee objects, you know that each employee has some ID number and the salary, which is very important. Diba? Pag gumagawa kasi tayo ng class or an object, for example, you have to think ano nga ba yung mga properties niya based on the given problem na binigay. So in the end, makikita natin dito yung mga sample problems natin and we will try to solve that. Now, suppose you hire a new type of employee such as, for example, salesperson or service representative that requires not only an ID number and a salary, but also a data field to indicate the territory served. For example, you can actually create another class with a name employee with territory, diba? And provide the class 3 fields. You have here integer, you have here the salary, and you have the territory. But then you notice that I actually didn't put here the ID and salary because ang bago lang naman dito na data field is the territory. Diyan ngayon papasok yung tinatawag natin na inheritance. Because once you have actually set an initial property of the employee, definitely itong ID and salary nito, mai-inherit yan na kahit sinong class na gagamit niyan. But it so happened that the employee with territory object has a new property. Kailangan mo siyang isulat sa UML diagram natin. So parang ito, hindi ko na sinulat dito si ID and salary. That simply indicates that the employee with territory class inherited the ID and salary, including their set ID and get ID methods. Okay? Now, when you do this, you are actually duplicating much of the work that you already have done for the employee class. And the wise, efficient alternative is to create the class employee so it inherits all the attributes and methods of that employee. Yan yung sinasabi ko kanina, di ba? So, you can just simply add one field like territory, tapos two different methods such as the set and get territory. Yan. So, ganun po yung example. Ganun yung napakadali nating pwedeng maintindihan ng concept ng inheritance. We are just simply inheriting a specific property from the main class, for example. Okay? Now, when you use inheritance to create the employee with territory class, you are saving time because number one, these employee fields and methods already exist. So instead of duplicating this one, hindi mo na kailangang isulat ulit yan dun sa code mo. All you have to do is to simply inherit. Okay? You can just simply inherit all the classes from employee and apply that in your employee with territory class. You are also reducing errors because the employee methods already have been used and tested. And also, you are reducing the amount of new learning required for programmers to use the class if they already are familiar with the original class. Now, hindi pa tayo totally nag-i-inherit Concepts pa lang to. In Java programming, in order for us to tell our program that we are planning to inherit a specific class, we have what we call the keyword extends. Okay? We have the keyword extends. The keyword extends here achieve to apply the concept of inheritance. Say for example, the following class header creates a superclass, subclass relationship between employee and employee with territory. Yung ito, di ba? So merong arrow yan pataas dito. This simply indicates that we are trying to inherit. This class is trying to inherit ID and salary properties. In application in Java programming, we can just simply write public class, employee with territory, use the keyword extends. Take note, this is extends tapos small letter. Yan. Ano yung i-extend mo? Employee class. This simply means that you are inheriting all the attributes ni employee na sinulat mo. Now, say for example dito sa ito natin. Okay. Each employee with territory automatically receives the data fields and methods of the superclass employee. Ang superclass natin is we are talking about the employee class as a whole. So meaning, ito pa lang si int ID na to, double salary na to, including their accessors and mutators, will actually be automatically inherited inside the employee with territory. Diba? Now, you can write a statement that instantiates a derived class object such as employee with territory, northern representative. So basically, ini-instantiate mo to. Ito ang tatawagin mo, si north rep. And take note, yung class employee with territory natin uses the keyword extends. Diba? So, hindi mo na dito dineclare ulit si int ID and int salary. Because automatic na ano mo na na inherit mo na yon from the employee class. So all you have to simply to do is to simply put the single the single property such as the territory lang. Diba? So using this class, pwede mo ngayon tawagin si getID from the employee class. Yan, dito. Tatawagin mo si getID which simply returns the ID value which was set earlier in the setID method. Ito. Yan. So, tatawagin mo lang siya getID, getSalary, getTerritory. Take note that the getID method belongs to a different class outside, di ba? The getSalary also belongs to another class which is also outside of that one. So, para mas madali nating maintindihan, again, etong dalawang to, the getID and getSalary was inherited. Okay? Na-inherit, namana ni class employee with territory po yung property ni employee. So, parang ito, yan. So, after the north rep object is declared, here, any of the following statements are actually valid. So, set ID with a value, set salary with another value, and the territory. Okay, so that's the concept of inheritance. However, the northern rep objects, itong northern rep object na to, meron siyang access sa lahat ng parent-employee class. So, such as the set method and of course, the get method. Okay? So, mamaya, again, magkakaroon tayo ng example dito and you will actually be required to do the you do it part on your own para mas maintindihan ninyo to. Okay. Inheritance, take note, is a one-way proposition. A child inherits from a parent. In our example, we have the employee as the superclass or let's say a parent class. And the employee with territory is actually considered as a child class. Not the other way around. Okay? So, hindi po pwedeng magmana si parent sa anak niya. Pero ang anak ang pwedeng magmana sa magulang in Tagalog, di ba? So, when you instantiate an employee object, it doesn't have any access to the employee with territory methods. Take note. So, since you have here an employee with territory, ito kasi walang pake, totally, dito. Hindi po yung araw nandito Hindi po ganon, di ba? So, wala siyang pake dito, not unless you will inherit. You will put the keyword extends. Yan. So, it makes sense that a parent class object doesn't have access to its child data and methods when you create the parents class. So, you do not know how many future subclasses it might have or what their data fields or methods might look like. Okay? So, in addition here, itong subclasses. The subclasses are more specific than the superclass. They extend. An orthodontist class and periodontist class are the children of the dentist. So, you have a superclass of dentists and a parent class, dentist. So, under dentist, meron ka pa ulit panibagong class na orthodontist and the periodontist na classes. Now, you do not expect that all the members of the general parent class dentists to have the orthodontists apply braces method, say for example, or the periodontists deep clean method. However, kung titignan natin dito, the orthodontist object and periodontist object have access to more general dentist methods, conduct exam, and bill patients. Which is actually, hindi ko lang dito nilagay yung sample program, pero kung nai-imagine nyo, you have the dentist and you have the following attributes for dentists. Diba? So, meron kang conduct exam and bill patient. Now, the dentist, by using the keyword extends, yung orthodontist, public class orthodontist extends dentist is actually the way how you inherit all the attributes ni dentist classes. Okay? So, ganun po yun. Ganun ang very, very simple analysis on how we use what we call the inheritance in Java. And so, you can use the instance of operator to determine whether an object is a member or descendant of a class. If, for example, yan, Balik tayo sa northern rep. Ito. The northern rep is an instance of employee with territory. Yan. The following expressions are true. Northern rep is the instance of employee itself. So, ganun po yun. If a clerk is another type of employee and it's an instance of the employee class. However, the following is false. A clerk, instance of employee with territory. Wala na po itong paki. Okay, wala na po itong paki si employee kay employee with territory. Again, si parent class lang po. Parent-child relationship po, hindi child-parent relationship. Okay. Now, the programmers usually say that instance of yields true if the operand on the left can be upcast to the operand on the right. Okay? So, you have here an example code na actually talagang pinoprovide natin to para mas maintindihan nyo kung paano mag-work nga ba ng maayos ang ano natin, ang tinatawag natin na inheritance. So, I am really, what do you call this one? Recommending that you do this on your own. Especially itong concept ng superclasses. Yan. Any questions so far? Again, try to do this on your own po. Okay. Your sample problems actually are related to these sample solutions na meron din tayo. So, napaka-importante na itong part ng module natin lagi natin ginagawa. Okay? So, yan. Medyo mahaba yan. Pero, maganda po itong example na to at least have deeper understanding on how extends keyword work properly. Ito. Diba? Extends. So, let's move on. Questions so far? Again, do this on your own. Make sure to follow each steps. This is also a great opportunity for you to practice your other object-oriented programming skills. And masaya po siyang gawin. Masaya po siyang gawin. Alright, so let's continue. Since we already know the concept of inheritance, let's actually move on to what we call the overriding superclass methods. Now, say for example yan, you have your main class or the superclass, yung pinaka-class ng lahat ng class, di ba? And you create a subclass by extending the parent class. The new subclass contains those data and methods that were defined in the original superclass. So, by using the UML diagram, the class diagram that we had earlier, diba? So, ma-identify mo kasi kung ano nga ba yung mga attributes and data fields na kailangan mong i-inherit from the parent class itself. So, in other words, any child class object has all the attributes of its parent. And sometimes, however, the superclass data fields and methods are not entirely appropriate for the subclass objects. So in these cases, you want to what we call override the parent class members. So there are some cases that you are trying to put what we call an override annotation sa fields natin. Mamaya, makikita natin dito yan sa example natin kung anong ginagawa ni override annotation or override tag na tinatawag natin. To override a field or method in a child class means you are trying to use the child's version instead of the parent's version. Okay? Meaning, pag sinabi kasi nating override, pag naglagay ka ng override, sinusubukan mong, although inherit ng class na yon, yung parent class, by simply putting an override annotation, meaning you are still trying to use the data fields inside the child class itself. Okay? And so when you use the English language, for example, you often use the same method name to indicate the diverse meanings. For example, if you think of all musical instrument as a class, diba? You have musical instrument, you can think of play as a method of that class. If you think of various subclasses such as guitar, drum, yan, you know that you carry out the play method from the parent class itself. Diba? But then, the way on how you try to inherit the play method from the main class, which is the musical instrument class, for example, it's quite different for each type of the guitar. I mean, for the instruments. Say, for example, diba, ang guitar, piano, and drum, you have different ways on how to play them. Although, the play method is being inherited from the class or the parent class musical instrument. Diyan ngayon papasok yung overriding because although you are trying to use or inherit the play method, you are still planning to use the play method inside the subclass itself or child class itself. Ganun po yun. Ganun ang overriding. And using the same method name to indicate different implementation in Java, that is what we call polymorphosim, which is a separate topic for another week. Actually, this is module number 7. Di-discuss rin natin to. This is a term meaning many different forms of action take place, even though you use the same word to describe the action. In other words, many forms of the same action describing the word exist, depending on the associated object. So, ito, the object-oriented programmers, yan, mga OOP. Pagka natututo kasi kayo ng OOP, you usually use the term polymorphism when discussing any operation that has multiple meanings, regardless of whether inheritance is involved. But then, to be honest with you guys, the polymorphism, madalas nyo na itong magagamit kapag nandun na kayo sa mismong application nito or sample program. Pero hindi nyo, makakalimutan nyo na you are trying to polymorph a specific, class itself. Anyways, again, this is a separate topic that we will try to discuss for the next week. Hindi pa ngayon, pero sa mga susunod na weeks natin. Okay, so, balik tayo sa override tag. Yan. Again, when you override the parent class in a method class or in a child class, you can insert an override annotation just prior to the method. Itong override annotation, ganyan po yan. At sign, tapos you have override. Now, this annotation will simply let the compiler know that your intention is to override a method in the parent class itself. So you have here public void display rate of pay. Yan. The display rate of pay, yan, it will simply display a weekly pay rate, and your intention is to override the method in the child contract employee class to display a contractual pay rate. Tingnan natin to. So, meron ka ditong override annotation. Once again, you are simply trying to override the values on a rate of pay from the parent class itself. So again, to override the method in the child contract employee class to display a contractual pay rate. So mamaya, dun sa example natin, try natin tong gamitin. And magpapakita ko dito ng mga example as well. And for the future purposes na rin, the more kasi na nagko-code tayo, the more na mas na-encounter ninyo tong mga ganito. Yan. So, once again, another part here of the program, which is only the continuation of the program earlier, you have to make sure to do this once again on your own. And take note, we use the override annotation here. Yan, public void display invitation. This simply means that you are trying to override the display invitation from the display invitation method earlier. Yan, so it will override the parent class method. So it has the same name as well. Okay, madali lang intindihin ng override annotation. Trust me, mukha lang yang complicated, pero in reality, napakadali niyang i-implement. Okay, so pasok tayo dito ngayon sa may topic natin na tinatawag natin na constructors. We will now try to call the constructors during inheritance. We already know the purpose of constructor, how to use them, di ba? How to implement them. So you have, for example, person as an entire class. You have the following data fields or attribute. And from this attribute, dito mo siya dineclare sa loob ng constructor natin. Now, there is a way for us to call constructors during inheritance. Yan. So when you create any object, as in the following statement, you are calling constructors. So for example, ito, sum class, an object, new sum class. Kagaya rin dito sa may test wedding natin, na sample natin before. Diba? So person bride 1 equals new person with the following yan, fields. We are simply calling their constructor. Si bride dito, alam naman natin na yung bride dito is inside the person, which is actually yan, wedding. Yan dito siya. Yung public, yung couple. Diba? Si couple. Kung natatandaan nyo. Diba? So, ito ang tinatawag natin. So, when you instantiate an object that is a member of a subclass, you actually are calling both the constructor for the base class and the constructor for the extended derived class. Now, when you create any subclass objects, the superclass constructor must execute first, and then the subclass constructor executes. Now, say for example here in this figure, itong sample program natin dito, we have three different classes. A superclass, public A superclass, which is a constructor. Ayan. And we have the second class, which is a subclass, but then it will simply extend or inherit all the properties ni superclass. So, in-inherit niya, di ba? So, in this case, you have a constructor, a subclass. Yan. And lastly, you have the third class, which is the main method. Yan, the demo constructors class. But take note, tingnan nyo ha, inside the main method, we instantiated an object, subclass, with a name, subclass, child. Diba? So, ibig sabihin na ito, tinatawag natin si whatever subclass. Itong subclass na to. Yan. Tinatawag natin ito, but then, tinatawag din natin dito si superclass na to. Kasi nga, in-extend mo eh. Diba? So, in-extend mo. So, kung magpiprint ka dito, you can actually simply call this method a superclass, yan, by using child.aSuperclass itself. So, tinatawag mo to. That can be possible using inheritance. But then, if you put here an override annotation, for example, even though it inherited, or dito, even though it inherited the superclass, it will simply override, okay, all the properties and will proceed using the properties inside the subclass method itself. So, ganun yung difference nila ng may override annotation. So, pag may override dito, meaning wala na siyang paki dito, papasok lang siya dito sa subclass na to. Ang gagamitin pa rin yung properties as yung sa subclass na. So, ganun po yun. Okay? I know it still sounds confusing kasi hindi nyo pa naman totally na apply ito. This is really helpful, I'm telling you. This part here is really helpful. So, if I were you, after this class, try nyo siyang gawin on your own. Ito po. Questions so far? So, let's continue. Ito, again, let me again reiterate. Itong mga nandito, itong colored part ng module ninyo, hindi lang yan nandyan kasi trip ko lang. That will simply help you guys to solve any specific problems related to inheritance as well. Okay? So, let's try to move on here and proceed dito sa accessing superclass methods. Now, earlier in this module, we actually learned that a subclass can contain a method with the same name and arguments. Diba? So, subclass natin, again, pwede kang magkaroon ng same method as the parent class. Yan. Now, when this happens, you use the method name with the subclass object, and the subclass method overrides the superclass methods. However, if a method has been overridden but you want to use the superclass version with the subclass, you can simply use the keyword super to access the parent class method. Now, let's take a look at here at the example. So, you have three different classes. Okay? So, kung titignan natin maigi to, si customer, you have preferred customer, and test customer, which is basically the main method of the entire program. Now, the public class customer has the following data fields. You have int ID number and double balanced owned. And you have here a constructor which simply declared or set the values of ID number and the balanced owed. Yan. Based from this one. Ito, di ba? So, for example, ito. Customer, one cust. The one cust here is actually the name of the customer, and you instantiated that using or with the following values. 124, meaning binabato mo yan dito. The ID number will now be 124, and the salary or the balance owed is 123.45. So, for example. Now, madali pa, 'di ba? Pag ito okay pa 'to, madali pang intindihin 'to because we have been doing that. We have been doing this like since nung 2 weeks ago sa may discussion natin ng methods. Now, since we are talking about inheritance, we have here the second class, which is preferred customer and extends all the customer properties. It extends all the customer properties. Ano nga ba ulit yung property ni customer? We have ID number and balanced owed. Diba? So, ibig sabihin, inside the constructor, we can simply call the balance and the ID. Nang napakadali, di ba? Hindi na natin siya dineclare dito kasi na-declare na natin siya sa pinaka-parent class. And the preferred customer class have another data field which is discount rate. So, in this case, meron siyang sarili. Pero kung take note, tingnan nyo, tinawag niya si ID dito. Tinawag niya rin si balance dito. And using the super keyword, this simply means that you are actually trying to call the values ni integer ID and the double balance as well. So, by adding super, nung last discussion natin, we have this, meaning you're only referencing that property to itself. Pero this time, using the super keyword, meaning you are calling this one. Although we extended the customer, this is actually the safest way on how you call the values of ID and balance itself. Yung ID and balance natin, silang dalawa. Diba? So, this is the constructor. Now, let's proceed here with the override annotation display method. Ano napansin natin? This display method is the same with the display method here. Although, since we use an override annotation here, meaning wala na tayong paki dito sa display method na to, but we have here another display method na gagamitin natin. Pero even though, take note, even though na-override natin itong si display, I know this will sound redundant, even though na-override natin ito, by using the keyword super.display, this will simply call the superclass display method, even though, again, it was overridden. So meaning, dalawang system.out.println ang lalabas dito sa display na to once you call the display method in the main method itself. Diba? Ito, tignan natin. Diba? So, you have here one cust. Okay pa yan? Na ito yung tatawagin mo using one cust. Diba? One cust.display. This will simply call this method. Pero this time, the second class, which is preferred customer, which is the second class, which extended the parent class itself. Yan. You have the following values na ibabato. 125. Yan, 3456.78, which is the double balance, and 0.15 as the rate. So, okay pa, di ba? Nabato na natin. However, since we tried to call the value of ID and balance, yan, yun yung gagamitin natin, yung value ni ID and balance dito. So, once you try to display or call the display method inside the 1P cast, ito, so, display method. Pareho kasi sila, di ba? Pero ito na override. mag-end up na whatever system.out.println that you actually placed here will still be called, which is a system.out customer number, tapos yung ID number, tapos si balance owed. So, matatawag pa rin ito. And at the same time, may pa-print itong si discount rate na to. Ganun po siya. Try to do this. Try to at least create 3 different classes on your own. Try to simulate this one as well para mas maintindihan nyo. Pero, sana nagigets natin yung idea na kapag ka nag-override tayo, yan, pag nag-override tayo, meaning, in-override natin yung values, in-override natin yung attributes, pero, kung gusto mo pa rin tawagin yung attribute na yon, just use super. The super keyword. Ganun po yung purpose ng super keywords natin. Anyways, usually sa problem merong clue naman kung paano tayo or kailan tayo gagamit ng super keywords at the same time. Okay, question so far? Ano naman? Masaya tong inheritance. Mahirap lang intindihin sa umpisa kung hindi naman natin totally nagagamit. Diba? So, let's try to compare this and super. And so you have the parent class, you have the child class. Diba? In a subclass, the keyword this and super sometimes refer to the same method, but sometimes that they do not. For example, if a subclass has overridden a superclass, again, this is a subclass. Yan. Named some method. Ito, it was overridden it overridden the some method from the parent class. The super.sum method simply refers, this simply refers to the superclass version of the method. Ito. And both sum method and this.sum method here refer to the subclass version. So, ito nga, you have the parent class, you have the child class. Pag tinawag mo si super, okay, pag gumamit ka ng super, ibig sabihin, tinatawag mo si parent class. Pag tumawag ka ng this sum method, you are apparently calling the child class. Now, on the other hand, if a subclass has not overridden a superclass method named sum method in this example, the child can use the method name with super. Ito. Again, hindi ka nag-override dito Yung child class mo, there is no sum method, meaning hindi ka nag-override na kahit ano. Yan. If you use the super sum method, you are still calling the parent class. If you use the this method, you can still call the parent class itself. So, ganun po siya. Same concept ang super and this. Depende lang kung kailan mo siya gagamitin or kailan siya na-override. Okay? So, I know this isn't enough to at least understand the concept of the programming na meron tayo ngayon. But then, let's try to answer kahit yung number 1 lang para mas maintindihan agad natin how to inherit. Because this is actually plenty. This is a practice code for you guys. This is an example code problem for everyone. Let's try to do this on our own. Yung number 1. Ano natin? So, create a class named horse. Okay. So, meron tayong horse that contains the following data fields. So, you have name, color, birth year. So, include get and set methods for these fields. Walang problema. So, we have parent class. We can declare that this is a parent class. Next, create a subclass named racehorse, which contains an additional field that holds the number of races in which the horse has competed. And additional methods to get and set the new field. Okay. So, nasa na main method natin. Write an application that demonstrates using objects of each class. So, let's try to do this. We have 3 different classes, horse, racehorse, and demo horses. .java. So, gawin ko muna dito si number 1, si demo horses. Si demo horses natin dito will simply have the public static main string. Yan. So, i-ano lang natin to, isi-secure lang natin ito. And from this alone, we can safely assume that we can instantiate the horse. Yan. We can instantiate the horse and we can also instantiate the racehorse. Itong dalawang to. So, in the main method, you have horse. I'll name that as H, for example. New horse. Nag-error pa yan because hindi pa nag-exist yung horse class. We also have racehorse, RH, is equal to new racehorse. Yan. So, okay pa yan. Nag-instantiate tayo. Wala nang problema. May points agad yan kapag activity. Let's try to create another Java class here, which is horse.java. Oops. Nasaan na yun? Nawala. Horse.java ito. Ayan. So, nakikita naman, no? So, sa horse.java, ano yung sabi dito kanina? It contains data fields for name, color, and birth year. Okay, so walang problema. And ngayon, gawin natin si racehorse. Si racehorse, we have racehorse.java. So, lagay siguro natin ito dito. Tapos, yung main method natin, ilagay lang natin somewhere dito sa ilalim. So, you have demo horses, you have main method, and you have the racehorse. So, kumpleto na yung tatlong method. Gawin muna natin si racehorse. So, create a class named horse that contains data field for the name, color, and birth. So, meaning, sa loob nito, pwede tayo agad mag-set dito ng private string name. Tama na. Name. You also have color. Private string color. And you have private string birth year. Now, from this alone, actually pwede tayo ditong mag-set. Ito yung magiging attribute natin na i-extend ni racehorse later on. I-extend yan ni racehorse. So meaning, using these three attributes, we can actually safely assume that we can create the set name. Yan. The public void set color. Diba? So, safe yan. Pwede nating maano yan. Based from this. Set birth year. And of course, yung get natin. Public string. Get name. Public string. Get color. And public string. Get birth year. So, easy. Diba? So, wala kang problema dyan kasi naano mo naman, magagawa mo na siya. Yan. So, kompleto na. Kompleto ka dito. So, we can just simply dito sa loob ni, return name. Diba? We can return the name. We can also return the color. We can also return the birth year. Birth year. Ayan. Now, next is for us to set. Paano ba tayo magsiset dito? Hindi ako naglagay dito ng initial value. Diba? Pero I can simply, safely assume that inside the main method, pwede kong tawagin si horse, that set name. Kumbaga dito, pwede ko silang tawagin dito pa lang. Set color and H that set birth year. And since I am setting these values, it's also possible for us to use, in my case, I'll be using J option. Ayan. Tapos dito sa set name, I can just simply use J option pane show input dialog. Yan. Tapos, please enter the name of the horse. Ayan, please enter the name of the horse as setters. Ganon din dito, pero this time, color. Ayan. So, J option pane that show input dialog, null, please enter the color of the horse. Easy. Set birth year. Ganun din. J option pane dot show input dialog, null, please enter birth year of the horse. Yan. So easy pa, di ba? So from the main method, tatawagin natin siya. So this will automatically execute and will be stored in the value name and will eventually be transferred dito sa get name as well. So wala na tayong problema sa horse. Ngayon, si racehorse naman is a subclass. Okay? And this will contain an additional field that holds the number of races in which the horse has competed and additional methods to get and set the new field. So you have the new field. Ano yung pangalan ulit ng new field natin? Ayan, holds the number of races. Okay, number of races. So, the racehorse here will still be inherited or inheriting the horse. May inherit pa rin niya. Pero this time, meron tayo ditong panibagong field na private void or private string race the number of race. Okay? So you have public void set race, and you have public string get race, which simply get the value of race num. And for the set race, yung set race kasi, pwede rin natin siyang tawagin dito. So rh.setRace. Tapos, ito magiging import J option din. Then, import javax.swing.J option pane. And, set race natin is race num is equal to show input J option pane dot show input dialog null. And, ano to? Enter the number of horse races. Enter the number of horse races. Yan. So, wala ka ng problema. Naset mo na yung class mo na racehorse, which is a subclass. But this time, may last pa eh. Write an application that demonstrates using objects of each. Take note ha. Of each class. So, meaning, dito sa loob ng main method natin, meron kang J option pane. Dot show message dialog. This will simply call. Yan. The name of the horse is, medyo mahaba lang. Tanggalin ko to. And the name of the horse is, this time kukunin natin si horse get name. Diba? Plus is, ano to, ganyan. Tapos ganyan. Tapos, the horse's color is h.getColor. Okay yan. Plus, period, it was born on h.getYear, birth year, plus tawagin natin ngayon si get name ulit. Get name, tapos si class racehorse has taken part in how many races. Kung ilan yung ilalagay nating races dito. rh.getRace and plus races. So, run natin. Diba? So, ang ginawa lang nito, tinawag niya both methods ng each classes. So, safe ka na dito. Wala ka nang magiging problema dyan. So, you have enter the name of the horse, John Brown, birth year, number of horse races. Diba? So, 1, 2, 3, 4, tinawag niya dito. And so on. Diba? So, madali lang naman ang inheritance eh. Again, inheritance simply uses extends. Keyword naman. So, kung gusto nyo naman ngayon mag-override, yan. Ibig sabihin, meron ka ditong additional na method. Yan, may additional method ka dito na same name ng method na to. Ganun siya. So, di ba, madali lang namang intindihin ng inheritance. So, I guess, mas maganda kung i-screenshot nyo to sa part nyo. This is, the second problem is a practice problem for majority of us. And so, try to do this on your own. Practicein nyo. Madali lang tong intindihin, no? Kasi you have number 1. Malabo ba? Okay lang yan. Sige, mamaya na lang. Number 1, the second problem, you have the parent class rock. And that's a superclass. For rock samples collected and cataloged by a natural history. Basta alam natin na rock yan. Now, the rock class contains fields, number of samples, a description of the type of rock, and the weight of rock in grams. So, using this part of the code here, ito pa lang, pwede nyo na to kasing gamitin as the framework for the rock class na meron tayo. Now, you have to include a constructor that accepts parameters for the sample number and weight. So, meron ka ditong public rock na constructor. Diba? The rock constructor sets the description value to unclassified. Yan. And include get methods for each field. Alam na natin yan. Create 3 child classes. So, you have rock class as a parent. This time, you have to inherit or you have to create 3 different classes: igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic rock that inherits all the properties ni rock later on. And the constructor for each classes require parameters for the sample number and weight. So, search the internet for a brief description of each rock type and assign it to the description field. Yeah. And create an application that instantiates an object of each type. So, madali lang to. Actually, tatawagin mo lang naman si number and weight and the description of each classes. This simply looks complicated, pero trust me, this is very, very easy. Don't worry, bibigay ko naman yung sagot nito for the next week or for the following weeks. Pero I want you to at least ask me questions later on related to this problem and the number 3 problem. Tapos pakita yung sa akin, personally, kung tama ba yung pagkakasolve nyo nito. Number 2 and number 3. Madali lang to. Napakadali. Ganito lang din to. Itong framework na ginawa natin dito sa horse na to, that is actually specifically how you create or you solve this problem on your own. So, let's try to take a screenshot sa part ninyo. Ayan, malabo pa ba? Ayan. Malabo pa ba? Tanggalin ko mukha ako. Alright. So, let's create here a new class. Java class rock. The rock. Ayan. So, the rock, meron tayo ditong, this is a superclass. You have the following field: number of samples, description, and the weight. Okay, weight. So, in grams. So, kung gagawin natin to, you have Of course, integer number of samples. That's number 1. Ano yung next? Number description of the type. So we have string type of rock. Okay, all goods. Tapos weight in grams. So meaning double weight of rock. Yan. So meron na, no? Nagawa na natin agad to. Next here is to include, sabi dito, include a constructor that accepts parameters for the sample number and weight. Oh, okay. So we have constructor public rock, and this will accept parameters for the sample number. So int number of samples, tapos si double weight of rock. Easy. Diba? Now, the rock constructor sets the description value to unclassified. So meaning, if we will try to reference this to number of sample, sabihin, dito pa lang to. Tapos yung type of rock natin, the type of rock is equal to unclassified for now. Yan. Tapos this dot weight of rock. So yun yung laman ng constructor natin. So far, you have questions? Wala naman, no? So mag-raise lang kayo ng hand if you have some questions. So okay na yung constructor natin. Now, the rock constructor sets the description value. Okay na. Include get methods for each field. Yan. Kaya-kaya na natin itong gawin, di ba? So, we have 3 attributes. We have 3 properties. Now, this is a perfect time for us to create public void set number of samples. Small letter lang to dapat. Set number of samples. Ang weird ko namang maglagay ng pangalan ng ano. Yan. Int number of samples. So take note kung paano yung pagkakasulat ko dito, ganun yung pagkakasulat ko dito sa public void na to. You have set type at public void set type of rock. Yan. This should be string. Yan. Tama na. Set type of rock ba ito? So, type of rock, which is type of rock. Yan. Tapos, public, ano pa ba yung mga isa-set natin? Set weight. Public void, set weight of rock. Yan. Set natin din siya. So, this should be double weight of rock. Ayan. Tapos, you have the 3 get. Yung tatlong yung get methods natin. So, for the get methods, we can just simply create public. This is int. Diba? This is int, public int, get, number of samples. Ayan. Ano ang i-return niya? Yung number of samples natin. So, therefore, kapag magsiset ako dito, I can just simply set number of samples equals no of samples. Tama. Next is, for the type of rock, I think hindi to dapat kailangan. Yeah, for now, tanggalin ko muna to. Kasi may tayo meron yung 3 rocks natin dito na kukunin natin Yung weight of rock na lang muna. Yung weight of rock here is actually weight of rock equals weight of rock. So, reference to itself lang yan, ha? Tapos, the public double get weight of rock. Yan. Public double get weight of rock. Return. Let's try to return weight of rock. Okay. So, okay na to. But, according here, includes get methods for each field. So, okay na yan. Meron tayo dapat ditong panibagong method. I'll name that as toString. This simply return and the following sample number. Then we will call here number of samples plus the weight and plus weight of rock plus the description of the rock, which is description plus type of rock. Mamaya, gamitin natin yan. Para lang sure. Nilagay ko lang yan kasi I just want to return this value, this string value sa loob. So, kompleto na. Hindi ko muna nilagay si type of rock kasi we have a class for that one. Diba? We have a separate class for that. So, gawin natin yung tatlong class na required. We have metamorphic. Nakalagay dito. Igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. Ano ba yan? So, tatlo. You have igneous rock, that class. You have sedimentary rock. Okay, goods. And lastly, you have metamorphic rock. Puro rock. Lagyan natin yung dito sa baba. 1, 2. So, ganyan siya. Ayan, mas magandang tignan, di ba? So, you have the parent class and you have the 3 rocks. Tapos, meron yung demo rock natin. Yung demo rock will actually serve as our main method. So, demo rocks. Lagyan natin siya sa baba. This is actually how you code using IntelliJ, ha? Para at least mas maging organized yung coding nyo. Lakihan ko na to. Now, according here to the problem that we have, sabi kasi dito, child classes sila. Ibig sabihin, we will be extending each classes. We will try to inherit each classes by extending the ano extend natin? Si rock. Ngayon. So, ganun din dito. Extend natin si rock.java. Tapos, ganun din dito. Extends rock.java. Ngayon, dito sa may loob natin ng main method, gawin ko na rin tong main method. Public static void main string args. Ayan. Oops, mali. This is actually where we will be calling each rocks. So, tatawagin natin dito si igneous, tatawagin natin dito si sedimentary, and tatawagin natin dito si metamorphic. Okay, so bakit ito may error for now? Ano yung error dito? No default constructor. So, no worries naman yan. Okay, so we can proceed with the next step of our coding. According here, so nagawa na natin itong create 3 child classes. The construct for these classes require parameter for the sample number, this one, the sample number, and the weight. Okay. So you have here a constructor. Gawin natin si ano muna, igneous rock. So you have public igneous rock. This time you have number of samples. Tapos, double weight of rock. Capital R. Since I am planning to use this one, tawagin ko to, I can just simply use super, number of samples, tapos weight of rock. So, tatawagin ko lang. Basically, tinawag ko lang ito. Ginamit ko lang yung ano nito. Yung property ni Superclass na meron tayo dito. Easy, di ba? So, wala pang problema yan. Goods na goods ka pa dito. So, that's igneous rock. Next is for us to implement the constructor dito sa sedimentary rock. Ganun din. Si sedimentary rock, copy lang natin ito. Itong loob na to. Space that there. Tapos sa loob na ito is, copy lang din natin to. Take note ha. Based from the problem here, yan. Require parameters for the sample number and weight. This is the constructor. Ito. Tignan nyo, di ba may error pa kasi yan. So kapag ka naglagay tayo ng default constructor, metamorphic rock, and we actually placed here the int number of samples, itong part na to, nawala na yung error. Diba? Tapos, ganun din dito. So basically, tinawag lang natin talaga siya. Ayan o. Yan. So, no problem na. You have created the constructor for each types of rocks. Now, search the internet for a brief description of each rock type and assign it to the description field. Sige, mamaya. Ito muna. Tapusin muna natin tong program na to. For the igneous rock, I think it's also safe for us to set type of rock. Itong type of rock na to, dito ko siya isa-set ngayon, hindi dito. Hindi dito sa parent, pero dito na lang. Set type of rock. Pero since the type of rock variable was declared in the parent class, we extended them, di ba? So, pwede na natin siya gamitin ngayon. Type of, anong pangalan na ito? Type of rock. Yan. This time, since nasa parent class yan, gagamitin natin si super, the type of rock. So, meron ka ng super dyan, no? Super. Public string get type of rock. Tapos, ang i-return natin dito is super the type of rock. Easy. So, ganun din dito kay sedimentary rock. So, we can just simply copy and paste everything. So, pakita ko lang ha. Paliitin ko ng konti ito. Dapat yung nakikita nyo. Anyways, naka-record po ito. So, no worries. You can always rewatch this part of the discussion. Yan. So, you have the following. No problem. Next is, yan, search the internet. Okay lang yan, madali lang yan. Brief description of each rock type and assign it to the description field. Create an application that instantiates an object of each type and demonstrate that the methods work appropriately. Save the file. Okay, easy lang yan. So, pasok tayo dito ngayon sa main method. For the main method, I am simply assuming that by simply instantiating igneous rock equals new igneous rock with, for example, a number of samples, 123, and the weight in grams, 4.5, for example. So, wala kang problema dyan. Then, object 1, dot set. Ano yung isa-set natin dito? The type of rock, which is dito. Set type of rock. Yan. Mag-search lang ako. Wait lang. Ito na lang. Igneous rocks are type of, okay. Crystallize. Ano to? Crystallizes something. Search na nga lang ako dito ng mas madali. Igneous rocks definition. Ayan. So, igneous rocks from the Latin blah 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 blah. Dito na lang. So, ayan. So, I set the, basically, just, you know, the igneous rock. Tapos, pwede na natin ngayong tawagin si system.out.println. Ano ang tatawagin natin dito? Si object1.toString na ang value ni toString dito is it will simply print out the number of sample. Yan. Get number of samples. And at the same time, will print the weight of rock and the description as well. Yan. So, okay ka na sa igneous rocks, no? It's now safely good to assume na pwede na tayong gumawa dito ng sedimentary rock. This is object 2. New sedimentary rock, for example. Tapos, with the following value, 2, 3, 4. Tapos, yan. So, gagaya rin ng ginawa natin kanina dito. Search tayo sa internet ng sedimentary rock. Sedimentary rocks. Definition. Okay, dito. Tapos, system. .out.println. Oops. Object 2. .toString. Yun. Teka nga. Pwede ko bang mailagay ito dito sa ilalim? Hindi. Next is, ano na yung isa? Metamorphic. So, tawagin natin si metamorphic. I'll name that as object 3 equals new metamorphic rock. Number examples, the weight, the definition, set type of rock. Ano ang definition ni metamorphic? Metamorphic rocks. Metamorphic rocks, blah, 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 whatever. Yan. Then, system.out.println .out.println object 3 .toString. Yun. Easy na easy, di ba? So, I hope nakikita sa ending nyo. Pero again, pwede naman kasi itong tanggalin ko yung mukha ko para makita yung part na to. Yan. So, irara natin itong si demo rock natin. Nasaan na yun? Ayun. So, kung napansin nyo, the output actually looks something like that. So, basically, na-print natin si description natin. Teka, nasan yung description? Description. Mali yung spelling ko ng description. Ito, description. Yan. So, go ahead. Take a screenshot of this sa ending nyo. Malabo pa ba? Yan. Sige, screenshot nyo na. So, at least we were able to solve number 2. Yung number 3, hindi naabot yan. Ayan. Goods. Alright, so once again, this is how object-oriented programming works. By having multiple classes and connecting them into a single program. So, we've been through a lot. since CP11a, and right now we are still facing a lot of, problems like this. So, I hope you can still keep up, pero kaya nyo yan. Tiyagain lang talaga. Yan. So, you are now ready to answer of course, your written work. Huwag nyo po itong binabaliwala. Madali lang po itong sagutan since na-discuss po natin siya lahat. And for the performance check, for the performance check, please make sure to follow the instructions carefully. Yan, especially itong corresponding comments per line necessary. So, please make sure to put comments line per line. Dito ko kasi nakikita kung sino ang nagkokopyahan sa hindi. Kasi, syempre, pag ginawa mo yung sarili mong problem, alam mo yung pasikot-sikot. Alam mo rin mag-construct ng sarili mong explanation kung paano gumagana yung line na yun. Okay, so you have 3 problems here. And it's very easy to do since we have an example. Right. Madali lang tong poem. Pizza. Okay. Question so far? Okay, so I think wala na tayong question, no? Sige lang, tanong lang. Okay, sige, may tanong daw. Yes,